Imagine hearing that a former American president tried to claim most of a West African nation's natural wealth, and that a young military leader stood up and said no. You click. You watch. You share. But what if the shock that keeps you glued to the screen isn't the truth of the claim, but what the claim reveals about power, pride, and a continent rewriting its rules? Tonight, we are going into Burkina Faso, where Captain Ibrahim Traoré's rise transformed a country battling insurgency into a symbol for resource sovereignty. We will separate story from rumor and drama from data to understand what defiance really looks like in a world of shifting alliances and viral narratives. Let's start with the rumor that set the internet on fire. Across social platforms, clips and posts claimed that Donald Trump had demanded a massive slice of Burkina Faso's gold and oil, even threatening deadlines and consequences. The videos felt electrifying. The lines sounded cinematic. But when you strip away edits and overlays, you find no credible proof that such a demand was ever made. Multiple fact checks traced viral audio to manipulated sources and debunked claims that Trump had issued ultimatums to Traoré. In other words, the headline was click-worthy, but not credible. That raises a bigger question: if the demand wasn't real, why did so many people believe it could be? To answer that, you have to understand the moment Burkina Faso was living through. In recent years, the country faced deep security crises, communities displaced by violence, and the erosion of trust in old partnerships. When Traoré took power, he adopted the rhetoric of sovereignty and self-determination. He ended the French military presence on Burkinabe soil. He aligned more closely with non-Western partners. He spoke the language of Thomas Sankara's legacy, dignity, control over resources, and the promise that the country's wealth would finally benefit its people. For millions of Africans and members of the diaspora, that message resonates. It fits an emerging narrative across the Sahel that rejects old arrangements in favor of bold, sometimes risky, national experiments. Gold sits at the heart of that experiment. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's top gold producers. Gold is the country's key export and a lifeline for state revenues. Yet for years, critics argued that the benefits of mining didn't reach enough ordinary people. Communities around mine sites complained of environmental pressures, social tensions, and uneven development. Meanwhile, artisanal mining and smuggling meant a lot of value leaked out of the system. Against that backdrop, the new authorities moved to tighten the state's grip on the sector. A revised mining code elevated the government's free carried interest in projects, signaling a strategy to capture more value at home. Officials talked about national pride, industrial policy, and the need to rewrite deals that felt lopsided. For supporters, those steps looked like long overdue justice. Here's a crucial piece that viral posts often skip: Burkina Faso does not have meaningful oil production. Claims of fresh deep wells and gushing pipelines have circulated for years, but authoritative data and investigations consistently show no proven oil reserves and no national output. That matters because it shows how quickly online narratives can mash together symbols of wealth, from gold to oil, to build a story that feels bigger than life. Oil becomes a character in the myth, even if it is not a character in the country's economy. So if the famous ultimatum never happened, what are the real points of contention between a country like Burkina Faso and Western powers? Start with governance and geopolitics. The transition authorities have suspended the normal path back to elected rule, tightened control at home, and leaned into security and economic relationships with Russia and other non-Western partners. That has come with consequences: reduced Western aid and training, complicated investment conditions, and reputational risks that make international financing harder. The government says this is the price of autonomy. Critics say it is a dangerous trade-off that could deepen isolation while failing to end violence. Inside the gold sector, the push for sovereignty is even clearer. Policy shifts have increased the state's stake in industrial projects, and authorities have signaled readiness to nationalize assets or revoke permits in cases they deem non-compliant. In practice, that approach has two faces. On one side, it can strengthen the government's bargaining power, lift fiscal take when prices soar, and channel more money into local priorities. On the other, abrupt interventions can spook investors, delay expansions, and reduce exploration that feeds tomorrow's production. It's a balancing act, and the stakes are high because gold revenues help fund the security fight and the social programs people expect. The regional picture adds more fuel to the narrative. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger jointly turned away from their regional bloc and formed a tighter alliance focused on their shared security and political outlook. They cut ties with traditional military partners and rolled out new identity documents, signaling a decisive break. In the same period, they courted alternative patrons and suppliers, from drones to heavy equipment, and sought to deepen trade and infrastructure links across their own borders. To supporters, this is the first honest attempt in decades to align foreign relationships with national interests. To skeptics, it's a high-risk bet that could leave economies more fragile and citizens more exposed. Now, let's return to the rumor and ask why it spread. Part of the answer is emotional logic. People who believe outside powers have long taken too much from Africa find it easy to accept a story in which a Western politician makes a shocking demand. It confirms what they already feel. Meanwhile, social media rewards outrage and certainty. A video that says someone demanded the majority of a nation's resources and got a resounding no will travel faster than a careful explainer about legal codes, tax regimes, and royalties. The architecture of virality favors the myth. But there is another reason the story took off: it gestures at a real struggle. Whether or not a single politician ever asked for a cut, global markets, multinational firms, and geopolitical pressures do shape who wins and who loses from natural resources. Governments in the Sahel are rewriting the rulebook to claim a larger share. Companies are recalibrating. Citizens are watching to see if promises of sovereignty turn into clinics, schools, and jobs. There is real drama here. You don't need a fabricated demand to tell a compelling story about power. How does this play out for ordinary people in Burkina Faso? If the state successfully captures more of the gold value, and if those revenues are managed with transparency, you could see funds flow to local services, rural roads, and programs that foster resilience where insurgents recruit. If policies scare away too much investment or trigger disputes, production could plateau, and the pie to share could shrink. The difference between those outcomes lies in the details: how contracts are renegotiated, how communities are consulted, how environmental standards are enforced, and how artisanal miners are integrated rather than criminalized. Diplomatically, the new posture has consequences. Western governments tie parts of their assistance to governance benchmarks. When transitions harden into open-ended military rule, sanctions and aid suspensions tend to follow. At the same time, geopolitical rivals are eager to fill gaps, offering security support and capital with fewer strings. That support can be decisive in the short term, but it can also breed new dependencies and reduce the leverage citizens have to demand accountability. This tension between needed help today and sovereignty tomorrow sits beneath almost every policy decision in Ouagadougou. For the United States, the stakes are bigger than any rumor. Washington has to navigate a world where anti-imperial solidarity is part of political identity in the Sahel, where publics admire leaders who push back against old partners, and where Russia is positioning itself as a security and mining player. If American policymakers want influence without fueling backlash, they will need to lead with humility, invest in non-military support that people can feel, and work with communities rather than just capitals. That approach takes longer and yields fewer headlines, but it builds trust where disinformation feeds on suspicion. There is also the media layer. When influence campaigns and local fandoms collide, leaders can be elevated to mythic status. Traore's supporters see a disciplined soldier who speaks for dignity. His critics see a charismatic strongman consolidating power while violence persists. Both views can be true in part. What matters for citizens is whether his government can deliver safety, opportunity, and a fair share of the country's wealth without eroding freedoms beyond repair. That is the test of any project built on the language of sovereignty. Let's challenge ourselves with a thought experiment. Suppose, for a moment, that a powerful foreign figure had actually demanded a share of Burkina Faso's gold. What would defiance look like beyond a viral quote? It would look like transparent budgeting that shows where gold revenues go. It would look like community development agreements that are enforced and publicly audited. It would look like a professionalized artisanal sector that reduces smuggling. It would look like a steady pipeline of exploration so future production doesn't collapse. It would look like courts and regulators that outlast any one leader. In other words, the most effective rejection is not a slogan, but a system. We also have to talk about the human cost. In towns far from the capital, families measure policy by whether their children can walk to school safely and whether a clinic has medicine when they arrive. Mining jobs can transform a household budget, but so can a mine closure. Security offensives can open roads for commerce, but abuse by any armed actor can harden grievances for generations. These are the stakes behind the rhetoric. So where does that leave you, the viewer, when you see a headline that says a leader refused to hand over most of his country's wealth? Here is a simple toolkit. First, ask what the country actually produces. For Burkina Faso, gold is real, oil is not. Second, look for the policy levers. Has the state changed its mining code, its ownership stakes, its export rules? Third, follow the money. Are revenues rising, and is there credible reporting on how they are spent? Fourth, watch the human rights and media environment. Do critics disappear from the conversation, or can they speak and organize? Those clues tell you more about sovereignty than any viral soundbite. As we wrap, let's come back to the core of tonight's story. The rumor was powerful because it fit the spirit of the times. A young leader in the Sahel stands up to an old power. The audience wants him to win. But the real victory will be measured not in a moment of cinematic defiance, but in years of patient statecraft, rules that outlive personalities, and benefits that reach the people who mine the gold and defend the land. If that happens, the story will not need a fabricated demand to be inspiring. It will be inspiring because it is true. I want to hear from you. Do you think the promise of resource sovereignty can be delivered without scaring off the investment needed to keep production alive? Do you believe alliances with new partners will improve security, or simply replace one kind of dependency with another? When a government raises its stake in mining projects, what safeguards should be in place to make sure the extra value reaches citizens? And when you see a viral clip that confirms your beliefs, what steps do you take to check whether it's real? If you found this deep dive valuable, subscribe to AfriPol Lens, turn on notifications so you don't miss our next investigation, and share this video with someone who cares about Africa beyond the headlines. Like the video to help more people see it, and drop a comment with your perspective. Your insights drive what we cover next.